One word I need to share before I start is Tony texted me last night and asked me to announce that Rekindle would not be held next week. So if you were planning on that, it will not be held. The word I want to share this morning comes from Mark 4:35 through 41. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, this scripture comes right after Jesus has spent a few days teaching. He's talked about the sower, the seeds. And he's been teaching the people. He's been spending extra time with the disciples, revealing to them the parables that he has been teaching, and kind of giving them some understanding of those parables. And it seems he hasn't had any time to himself. Now, most of us here have probably had that feeling. We sure would like to get away from the crowds. We sure would like to get away from the job. Some days we just like to get away from life and just kind of vegetate and do nothing. And Jesus is experiencing that this day. And he says to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." So Jesus and the disciples, they leave the crowd, they go down to the shore. They're at the Sea of Galilee. They go down to the shore, they get into the boats, and they start for the other side. Now, this is about a 6-mile journey across the sea. They've made it many times, I'm sure. Many of them were fishermen. Jesus gets in the boat. He lays down. He's going to take a nap. He wanted to get away. The disciples start rowing the boats. Now, history says that the Sea of Galilee can go from smooth as glass to very rough in the matter of minutes. Last week I said that Jesus' ministry went from 0 to 60 in the flash of an eye, and that's kind of how the Sea of Galilee is. It can just go from very calm to very rough in just a little bit of time. So they're on the sea. The winds start coming down through the mountains, and when they come through those mountains and they get to the sea, it just explodes. And that's what happens. They're out there on the sea. They're rowing away, and all of a sudden, this might be the fiercest storm they've ever found and ever been a part of. Verse 37 says there was a furious squall that came up. That's what my NIV Bible said. I went and looked in the King James. It said a great storm. So I went to see what the Greek for a great storm was. It said a whirlwind or a squall. And when you look up in Webster, it says a squall is a violent windstorm. But then it goes a little further. It says trouble or disturbance. This was trouble. It was a disturbance. The worst the disciples had ever experienced. Now the master, he's tired. He's worn out. He's asleep on a cushion in the midst of the storm. The disciples, they get excited. They wake him up. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Now I want to ask you something. First, everything Jesus had done for the disciples in their presence. Everything that everybody that he had healed, all the storms that he had been a part of, and they go and they ask him, don't you care? Have we ever said, Jesus, don't you care? Jesus, where are you in this storm? Jesus, I didn't ask for this. Why am I here? Everybody here has probably asked that question at some time. But Jesus comes back and he answers the question with the question which I've always heard you're not supposed to do. And he says, why are you so afraid? In the midst of the storm, he says, why are you so afraid? Now, if I was in the boat with Jesus, I don't think they had life jackets in. I would be waiting for that boat to turn over. And he says, why are you so afraid? Well, storms can be very scary. Even in the midst of them, you know Jesus is with you, there is still fear. You're still afraid. But I want to think about storms, and I want to think about where the storms in our life come from. First place they come from, well, maybe not the first place, but one of the places they come from is from our own rebellion and our own disobedience. That is deliberately living outside the will of God for your life. So, as a biblical example, think about Jonah. Jonah was so determined to prove to God that he wasn't going to Nineveh that he gets on a boat to go to Joppa. And pretty soon, there was a storm and Jonah is going for a swim. How many times have we not been obedient to what God has called us to, and we're in the midst of a storm? Something's happening in our life. As I was thinking about this week, I thought back to our time as before we went into the ministry. And the kind of storm that we were in our business, and trying to keep things going and thinking, what do we do and how do we do this? It was a storm in our life. But as soon as we were obedient to the will of God, as soon as I woke up and did what God was asking me to do, He has blessed us so abundantly in so many ways. So sometimes it's our own disobedience to what God is calling us to cause us to be in a storm, just like Jonah was in. Now sometimes storms are caused by others in our life. The people on the ship with Jonah, they had done nothing. They were on the ship going to Joppa. That was their job, or that's where they were headed. That was their plan. And all of a sudden there is this tremendous storm, and the ship is rocking, and they're wondering why. Well, it's because somebody else was not obedient, and the storm was caused by somebody else. Our adopted son created many storms in our life. It wasn't what we had done that put us in that storm. It was what our son was doing that put us in that storm. There are people today going through the same thing in their lives. Storms come because we live in a fallen world. Because of the sin in a person's heart. They seek to destroy others' lives. Just like happened last Wednesday night. Many families were thrust into a storm in an instant. Because of one man's choosing, of the sin in his life, the darkness in his life. And then storms are caused by the devil himself. If you don't think Satan won't bring a sudden storm into your life, just try spending more time with God. And Satan will throw up roadblocks to keep you from doing it every time. Just try to be obedient to God. And you'll hear the devil saying, you don't want to do that. You don't want to go there. He tries to entice you away. And it'll create a storm because you're not being obedient to God. Remember what 1 Peter 5:8 says. Be alert and sober of mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. He is out there. He is working. He will cause storms to keep you away from God. By bringing storms, he can destroy you. Now some of you are thinking, but I have Jesus in my boat. Why do I have to go through storms? Well, storms are a part of life. We grow in our storms. The disciples in the boat with Jesus, they grew. They asked questions. They were growing. We grow in our storms. I know that dealing with my business, that dealing with our son, we grew closer to God. And we're more prepared for ministry than we would have been if we'd went in 10 years earlier. It made a difference. Some of you are going to say, but I have more storms in my life than they do. Why do I have more storms than my neighbor has? Or maybe you think your neighbor doesn't have any. It's not realistic to think that somebody doesn't have any storms. Something I read the other day said, all people are either coming out of a storm, in a storm, or going into a storm. There's always something in our life going on. And everybody's going to go through storms sometimes. Part of the reason maybe you think your neighbor doesn't have storms is how they go through that storm. What God's doing in their life at that time. And how we respond to storms. And God will use the storm to grow you. To make you stronger. And bring glory to His name. Storms come quickly and unexpectedly many times. One phone call, one doctor's visit, one pink slip, and you're on your knees going, what happened? But when we're on our knees talking to God, God is getting closer to us. We find our strength when we're on our knees, and He helps us to stand. We have all heard how storms are classified. Tornadoes, we know EF1s through EF5s, and hurricanes are classified by their wind speed, and earthquakes are classed by their seismic readings. Well, the storms in our life are classed. Some are smaller, some large, some larger, and some we don't even know where they fall. And many people today are proactive when it comes to being ready for a tornado or a hurricane. You know, people have their storm kits ready to go to the basement, or they have them down in their storm cellar. People, when hurricanes are forecast, are battening down the hatches and getting ready for the rain. Having a plan, having emergency supplies. Well, we need to do the same for our storms that come into our life. We need to get Jesus in the boat with us before the storm comes. Where was Jesus when the storm came? He was in the boat. He was in the boat. And when a storm comes, you just reach over and get the other microphone. They just woke him up because of their fear. That might have even frustrated Jesus a little bit, because it seems they forgot whose they were and who they were. They forgot that Jesus was with them. And the outcome to that trip was known at the beginning of the trip, because Jesus said, "Let us go to the other side." Now that means Jesus is planning on going to the other side. He didn't say, "We might go to the other side." He didn't say, "You go and I'll catch up." He didn't say, "We'll try to go to the other side." He said, "Let us go to the other side." So he was going to go through the storm. He knew they were going to go through the storm. The safety in life is not the lack of storms. Safety is having Jesus in the boat when you get to the storm. Having Jesus in the boat when you get there. The disciples ask in verse 41, "Who is this?" And I read that and I think that is a stupid question. They've been with him all this time and they're still asking, "Who is this?" But you know what? When we get in the storms, we sometimes ask, who is this? Or where is he? Or why isn't he with us? If he's not with us, it's because we haven't asked. It's because we haven't got him in the boat. Well, he is the calmer of storms. And in Isaiah 26:3 it says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." That's from Isaiah, prophecy about Jesus. He will keep in perfect peace because they trust in you. Have we trusted? Have we got him in the boat? Are we ready for the storm? Are we ready? Billy Graham once said, "The storm was raging, the sea was beating against the rocks in huge dashing waves. The lightning was flashing, the thunder was roaring, the wind was blowing, but the little bird was sound asleep in the crevice of the rock, its head tucked serenely under its wings." That is peace, to be able to sleep in the storm. Storms are going to come. Every one of us is going to experience a storm in our life. It's a matter of whether we have Jesus in the boat now. If you have Jesus in the boat, you don't have to reach out for the life preserver. Get him in the boat with you today and weather the storm with peace. Amen.
Let's stand as we join together in Faith of Our Fathers. It's on page 710 in the hymnal.